Okay.
All for the chat.
I guess it'll become a little bit clearer why we've gotten such an early start this year. I'd like to just bring your attention to the go-to drop-down on the right hand of your screen. You can ask a question by way of the chat at any time as we're talking, and but otherwise we will have you muted. But again, as we go along, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions as well. So I'm delighted to have actually to bring three speakers this evening. Vanessa, some of you that have gone to camp before will maybe recognize Vanessa as a camp nurse. She's also our liaison with Hemophilia Ontario to assist us in the registration process. And you may know her as the nurse as one of the nurses at Sick Children's Hospital in Toronto, who is with the children's program at the hospital for bleeding disorders. And then she asked me that I leave out the awesome part, but I'm going to throw it in anyway. And she's an amazing enthusiast about camp. The other person that's with us this evening is Justin. Justin just finished his first year of camp as a student counselor. And so it's a pleasure to have him with us as well. And then I'm going to pass it over to Jenna Foley, who's the executive director and leading the registration and planning for Camp Wanakita in 2018. So with that introduction, I'll leave it to you, Jenna.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthew. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I hope we're all in the right place. We're here to talk about the registration and, more accurately, the pre-registration process for Camp Wanakita, as we'll get into a little bit. This is a Hemophilia Ontario program, but the camp itself is operated by the YMCA. It's located in Haliburton, Ontario. It serves ages 7 through 16. And those rules are set by Camp Wanakita. That's not something we have any ability to be flexible over, if you're wondering if you can send your younger children. And the camp dates for 2018 are going to be from July 29th through August 25th, although the length that your children might attend would be shorter, potentially depending on their age. There are 1-week sessions and 2-week sessions, as well as some spots for the whole month. And as Matthew alluded to, this is a really long process with multiple steps and stakeholders involved, which is why we need to get such an early start. But before we get into all of the hopefully informative and not boring technical details, we thought it would be wonderful to have a personal experience from a camper. So as Matthew mentioned, we have Justin on the phone with us. He is a 15-year-old who's been attending camp for a long time, but has recently completed his first year as a student counselor. And Justin, we welcome you to tell us more about your experiences.
Hello, I'm Justin. I'm just here to talk about my experience from Wanakita. So here goes. Since I was 10 years old, I've gone to Wanakita every single year. Each time I return home from camp, I'm already excited to go again the next year. I always have an amazing time, and I like to share the few things that make me love camp the most. To start off, when the campers arrive at Wanakita, they are welcomed by the new counselors and cabin mates with so much warmth. They get to know each other and become good friends within the hour. I remember my first year going and how my parents were worrying like crazy. But when I came back, I told them all about the things we did and what a great time I had. And they came to a realization that there's nothing to be worried about. That year is also the year that I learned to self-infuse. This summer I was taking part in my first year of student counseling, also called the SC program. I had more freedom than what I had in the year before, but also more responsibility, which is good because it helped me learn and grow. Part of the SC program is swimming and canoeing every day after breakfast. In swimming, we learned first aid, which can come in handy to help others and myself when I have a bleed. We also learn how to solo in a canoe, which I love because it's very peaceful and relaxing. The hemophilia nurses are very nice, helpful, and are always there if you need them. For my cabin's canoe trip, we went to Temagami near North Bay. My favorite part is when we hiked up Maple Mountain, which is 350 meters higher than the surrounding land. One of the most exciting activities we did at camp was whitewater rafting. Was it scary? Of course it was. But with the supervision of professional kayakers, I knew I was safe and had an incredible time riding the waves. A unique experience I had at Wanakita was the SC solo trip. Basically what happens is that each SC is brought out into the huge forest behind camp, where they build a shelter out of whatever they can find in the forest and then spend one night in it. I was eager to do this because I love nature and spending time in it. Time flies by at Wanakita and ultimately it becomes the end of our stay. We have a closing campfire ceremony where people can sing and show skits. The next morning, we all say our goodbyes and sadly go home. Overall, going to Wanakita is a highly rewarding experience, and I definitely recommend to send your kids to Wanakita, especially because it's already paid for by Hemophilia Ontario. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Justin. Thank you so much for sharing. We do appreciate it. And just so everyone knows, Justin will stay on with us throughout the webinar. In case anyone has any Justin-specific questions at the end, he can take those as well. But now I'd like to move on to Vanessa, who was introduced by Matthew as the nurse in the Sick Kids Bleeding Disorders program, to tell you a little bit more about her journey with the camp.
Thanks, Jenna. So really, my role in this presentation is to allay any fears and give you an understanding of what the nurse's role is at camp and the Bear Den itself, where we stay. So if you can just put the slide forward, thanks. So for the nurses in Ontario, we have a mission statement that actually talks about what the region of Ontario and the nurses within our province, that they're dedicated to actually the continued development and promotion of camp that actually was started in 1992. The history of camp in 1992 was after the tainted blood scandal, when a lot of camps would not accept patients or campers that were HIV positive and hepatitis C positive, where YMCA had an agreement that they would actually be welcoming to our campers. So at that time, the nurses had actually given their word by saying we would support our patients if you allowed them to come to your camp and participate, and we'd provide the medical coverage for them. So that's historically how we ended up being integrated into a YMCA camp rather than any other camp in Ontario. And really the whole purpose of the nurses attending camp is to have kids understand that it's important to have an integrated experience, that they're not independent, that they're not isolated from their peers, and that the peers should really understand what they go through on a daily basis and what it's like to have a chronic condition. So it's an integrated camp experience to provide a safe environment. It gives them the opportunity to acquire skills and techniques in a supportive environment. So somewhere where they're not, the skills aren't being provided by their parents, so they actually have to show some independence, but they have the support to be able to then foster that themselves. And to enable the children, youth to meet actually each other and to share experiences with one another. One of the best experiences at camp is seeing other children infuse and other children who are quite scared and have ports that don't ever want to peripherally infuse, and then by the end of the week they start to want to try to do it because they see their peers doing it. Also, seeing adolescents or student SCs that are in a more of a role model role, when they come in independently, a lot of the younger kids look up to them and see them as their heroes because they see, wow, this big guy and he's muscular and all the girls like him as a counselor, and how did he get this far from where he's at, from where I am? And we try to explain to them that one previously, when they were their age, they were the exact same way. So just being able to see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and that they're able to get to where these kids are nowadays. So it's really also to advocate and provide resources to the kids that are at camp that have inherited bleeding disorders, and offer support to the camp staff themselves. So the counselors that have kids in their cabin, or to the actual front office, or if we needed to actually talk to the local hospital. So if we had to go to the hospital, we're able to advocate on the child's behalf when their parents aren't there. So really, I think the overall highlights for Wanakita is that it's an integrated camp. There's up to 500 campers on site, and of those, we have about approximately 65 kids with bleeding disorders at that time. And that can range from anyone from 7 years of age all the way to counselors. So some of our kids come at a very young age at 7, and others integrate and start coming in when they're 10 or 11, like Justin. So depending on where your child is in the age category, there's different programs for them depending on that. The Bear Den is 24-hour coverage for the 2 weeks. So for the sessions that the kids are not in the student counselor program, so those kids are in either a one-week camper or a 2-week camper, there's nurses that are covering 3 nurses on site per week. And then afterwards, if they're a student counselor, they're there for 2 weeks without nurses, with the exception that those kids that are approved to be student counselors through the nurses in their program, as well as through Hemophilia Ontario, that they are actually self-sufficient and independent individuals, that they're able to advocate for themselves when there's no medical supervision provided. So really, going to Wanakita as nurses is an opportunity to educate the community at large. So we can educate YMCA, we can educate other campers, we can educate the local hospital. It was interesting this year, we had a full cabin of junior boys with severe hemophilia, and we had one camper that used to come with them in their cabin. And every day when it was infusion day, I'd say, buddy, you don't have hemophilia. He goes, well, what are you talking about? And I'd be like, you don't have hemophilia. And they call each other hemos. And he said, well, everyone in my cabin does. And I'm like, I understand that. But I said, if you want a hemophilia magazine, go for it. I said, the comics are out there. But I said, you don't need a needle. And he was kind of disappointed. And it was interesting for all the other kids to see that the boy that didn't have hemophilia was actually the excluded person. So seeing it from another perspective was quite cool. The opportunity to educate other nurses, so there's nurses in the health center themselves, as well as being able to provide peer mentorship. And then obviously observation, as I mentioned, leads to ambition, leads to a lot of kids learning how to be independent and start self-infusing, which is ultimately what our goal is being there.
Awesome. Thank you, Vanessa. I appreciate you being on the call, and we will have an opportunity for questions at the end, and I'm sure that there will be questions for you then specifically. I'm just going to go back a slide. As was previously mentioned, I'm Jenna, the Executive Director at Hemophilia Ontario, and I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about the role that Hemophilia Ontario plays at camp, because camp, as I mentioned, is delivered completely by the YMCA. We are not sort of associated or involved in any of the program planning or implementation. And the nurses are supported by Hemophilia Ontario to attend on site, but obviously they're affiliated with their respective bleeding disorder programs and not with Hemophilia Ontario directly. So our role is to raise the funding that helps pay for the camp. This program costs over $100,000 every year to deliver, and we facilitate to have the nurses participating, and we assist families and support through the registration process, which we changed last year and identified was a little bit confusing in the new format. So that's why we're undertaking this webinar this evening to hopefully address some of those questions this year. And really one of the goals of the program is to help develop future leaders or role models within the bleeding disorders community as these kids continue to develop. So talking about the timeline for registration, pre-registration is now open, and so I hope that you've all received the email, and if you haven't, the link will be included later on in the slides, and then you can also let me know and I'll send it to you again, but I'm assuming everybody who received an email about the webinar also received an email about how to register. Registration will close on October 16th. Families who complete the pre-registration form prior to October 16th will be considered for sponsorship first. I said it would close. Technically, it will still be open. Families can still complete the pre-registration form after October 16th, but they will automatically be placed on a waiting list. They will not be considered in that first round with everyone else. So this month, after the pre-registration closes on October 16th, Hemophilia Ontario, along with the camp nurse liaison, who is Vanessa, who's on the call with us this evening, as well as the Hemophilia Provincial Coordinator, Sarah Krimble, will meet to review the pre-registration applications. So these applications are going to be assessed against some predetermined selection criteria that have been in place to make sure that the program is really available to the children who need it the most. And we'll also be considering what spaces we have available against families' preferred dates to attend. And it's important to note that completing the pre-registration does not guarantee your child a space at camp. There is increasing demand every year, and we're expecting to have some record registrations this year again. The camper selection criteria that I mentioned earlier, our primary or our #1 target are campers with hemophilia A, hemophilia B, or other factor deficiencies or von Willebrand's disease who are candidates to learn self-infusion, and these campers would require an ongoing prophylaxis regimen outside of the camper treatment schedule. The next priority list would be campers who have attended past sessions but have not mastered self-infusion, and they require an ongoing prophylaxis regimen outside of camper treatment schedules. Also, campers who've previously attended who are self-infusers and require infusions and/or medical supervision. Next would be campers with moderate or mild hemophilia A and B who rarely bleed or who are not on a home infusion program. And then also considered for spaces would be campers enrolled with a hemophilia treatment center who have a known inherited bleeding disorder diagnosis. So that is the order of selection criteria that we would fill: 1 before moving on to 2, before moving on to 3. In some cases, in conjunction with the spaces that we have available based on age and preferred date. So on October 23rd, or sometime in the week thereof, all successful pre-registration applicants will be receiving an email. So that means that you've completed the pre-registration form online. We've now selected all of the spots, and so everyone is aware this year we have 65 spots available from Wanakita to register. That's the most we've ever had, and it's also probably our maximum. We have requested additional spaces and been declined by Wanakita, so this is probably the cap that we're ever going to be able to have. In that email that you'll receive in the week of October 23rd will be instructions on how to register directly with YMCA. It will include a specific single-use code for your registration, and that's so that when you go through the YMCA process, won't be required to add a payment. Anybody who received that past campers email that Wanakita sent out a week or 2 ago, if you tried to register through that, you would have found that they were seeking credit card information for payment, and that's why you need the Hemophilia Ontario code to use one of our spots. You'll also receive information on your assigned program and session dates. So when you fill out the pre-registration, you select your preferred dates, and every attempt is made to honor those, but sometimes that doesn't always happen. So you would receive information on what date you have been assigned, and then you would also get information on who to call if the code does not work. The deadline to use that code and to complete that registration with Camp Wanakita is November the 10th. So also in October, on the week of the 23rd, anyone who does not receive a spot due to an abundance of applicants and the selection criteria will be notified that they're placed on a waiting list. After November 10th, if additional spots have opened up and your child fits the criteria, you may be contacted to receive a space off of the waiting list. So now we're into November. The YMCA is going to open registration for their new campers on November 15th. And at this point, it's very difficult because they're opening up their spots to have any reserved for us, which is why it's very important that if you receive a code that you use it to register and ensure your space before November 10th so that those spaces are available for us and don't get used by YMCA campers when they open up their registration. The YMCA will also send us a list of campers who have successfully registered with their codes, and we will certainly be following up with any family that was approved for a space but did not register on time. Later in November and December, Hemophilia Ontario will be contacting all the successfully registered campers. So that means that you've now gone through the pre-registration process, you have been approved, you've been given a code, and you have successfully registered with the YMCA directly using that code. So we will contact you again once we receive the list of successfully registered campers from the Y to confirm just again the week of camp, the dates, as well as the session type. We will also be requiring a deposit based on the length of your session. So if your camper is attending for 1 week, you will be asked for a $150 deposit. If your camper is attending for 2 weeks, it will be asked for a $250 deposit. And if you are a student counselor position attending for all 4 weeks, you'll be asked for a $450 deposit. All additional camp information will be coming to you in April 2018. A little bit of information about the cancellation and deposit refund policy. We have aligned our deposits with what Wanakita themselves has based on the amount and length of the session. And this is a policy that we're instituting to ensure that all of our spaces get used and do not go to waste. I know it's so early in the year to be thinking about summer 2018, and I know that things happen and you might apply for a space today that maybe you're not able to use by the time camp rolls around next year. So we want to work with families wherever possible to make sure that those spots don't go to waste. And it's really important to us that the people who are registering are planning to attend. So families who register may cancel prior to April 30th and will receive a full return of their deposit, no questions asked. After April 30th, if you need to cancel your registration, you may do so with medical certification, and again, your deposit will be returned to you. After April 30th, if you cancel without medical certification, there will be no return of your deposit. And all deposits will be returned in full when your camper successfully completes their session at camp. And this is to ensure that campers actually attend. And it's meant to ensure that spaces allocated are used and do not go to waste. So some important notes. This is the pre-registration link. You should all have received it in the email like I mentioned. If you didn't, you can certainly let me know. I'm happy to send you the email again, or if you want to copy it down. I know it's not very catchy. I apologize for that. And it's also important to realize when you fill out the pre-registration, there is a statement included where you consent to sharing medical information between YMCA Wanakita and Hemophilia Ontario. Previously, Hemophilia Ontario captured a lot of that medical data that's required by the nurses during the pre-registration process. But last year, when they moved to an online registration, that was lost at the Hemophilia Ontario level, and the YMCA Wanakita has very strict rules about camper privacy and information sharing. So if you are not willing to consent to sharing your medical information, that means the hemophilia nurses will not have the information required in order to treat your camper on site, which is why it's really important that you consent to this during the pre-registration process. So as I mentioned, pre-registration will be closing on October 16th. Anyone who applies after that date will be put on a wait list and considered if additional spots are available. It's important to know that pre-registration does not guarantee you a space, and all families will receive decisions an opportunity to register formally with the YMCA in the week of October 23rd, and families that are selected for that registration opportunity must complete their final registration with the Y no later than November 10th in order to be guaranteed that that space will still be there for them and doesn't get filled up with YMCA campers. So that concludes the presentation that I had. And at this point, if there are any questions, either you can ask them through the phone, or if you've been making use of the chat function, maybe Vanessa or Matthew can help with that, just to read them out. And either Justin, Vanessa, or myself would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Jenna, we had one question while you were presenting, and maybe you wouldn't mind going back to the criteria. So the criteria that will be used in the selection process.
So I can speak to the selection process and the criteria, because that's typically what I look at when I'm going through all the applications. So really, this camper selection criteria is when we have too many kids apply, and we need to decide who would be of greatest benefit to go to camp. And not necessarily does that mean everyone isn't of great benefit to go to camp, because it's a great opportunity. It's more so focusing on what fosters independence and role models within our community. So the reason why we created this camper selection criteria a couple of years ago is because we were inundated with a number of patients that were applying for camper spots, and because of that, we felt that we needed to actually have some transparency as to why certain kids were going over others. So this is when this was developed within the nurses. And then it was approved through Hemophilia Ontario at that time. So really, what's important to note is that it's heavily focused on kids that need to learn self-infusion and maintain self-infusion. And then after that, anyone who has an inherited bleeding disorder is then pretty much up for grabs for a spot. What's important to note is that there may, in some cases, be kids that have a milder disease that end up going over a kid that has more severe disease because of the actual spots we have available from Wanakita. So let's say a junior boy, so a 7-year-old who has severe hemophilia A that needs to learn self-infusion. Well, we don't have a spot for him, but we have a spot for a girl with type 1 von Willebrand's disease who's 7. So because of that, those cases, then that means that the girl would go over the little boy. So there's certain scenarios that actually trump the selection criteria just because what we have available from Wanakita. But other than that, we strictly go by this criteria to actually decide who gets what position.
Okay, and then there's also a question about siblings attending. And so should they go through this process as well? Or should they register directly with YMCA?
When you complete the pre-registration form through the type form link, one of the questions will be, are you planning to register a sibling with Wanakita, and asking for the date? Because if you are, we make extra special attempts to ensure that you end up with the same dates. We wouldn't want your one child to go 1 week and your other child to go the following week. We would definitely want to keep them together. The question really depends on if they're a returning camper or not, because Wanakita has already opened up their registration for returning campers. So if you have a returning camper sibling and you want to register them, you may absolutely go ahead and do that directly with Wanakita now, but that still does not guarantee you one of the Hemophilia Ontario spaces. So I just caution you there. You might want to hold off on registering your returning camper child with Wanakita until you know for sure that your child who has a bleeding disorder will be sent through Hemophilia Ontario. And then the other thing is that if they are not a returning camper, the sibling is not eligible to register with Wanakita at all until they open up on November the 15th. So, but at that point, you would know if you have a for Hemophilia Ontario, you would know what week and session you've been selected for, and you would be able to make a similar selection for your sibling or for your child's sibling. But you would have to do all of those registrations directly through Wanakita and not with Hemophilia Ontario.
And while we're doing the camper selection criteria and choosing spots, we will take into consideration if there is a sibling going the same week, we'll try not to move that week for that family. That's in our best case scenarios. There are cases where we have to move, but typically we try to keep them on the same week so we know that their sibling is there at the same time.
Vanessa, this is a question for you. What's it like for a first-time camper?
I can speak from when I was a camper or from when these kids go to camp. But I think it depends on the personality of the child. So, and also the age in which they go. So I would say that majority of kids that go at 7, 8, 9 years old, usually the first 1 to 2 nights are difficult, just because it's usually their first time away from their parents and their first time that they've slept in a different location other than home. So I would say that the nurses provide a lot of TLC the first couple of nights, but after that, they pretty much, the week flies by. The second year that they go is a lot easier, and they actually, I don't see a lot of homesickness in the kids that have returned for their second year. But the first year, definitely, I'm not going to lie, that a lot of the younger kids do have a little bit of a hard time the first 1 to 2 nights. But I'm sure, Justin, you can probably talk to this as well. Did you have homesick, or did you help with the younger kids when you were in SC? And
I myself didn't get homesick. I knew some other people who did, but they usually got over it pretty quickly because we all got pretty close to each other, and it basically became our second home.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the kids, they're so tired at night too that they say they're sad, but they fall asleep so quickly because they're so active and they're so busy during the day that the first, I would say, first 1 to 2 nights are a little bit harder for them, but it's kind of like they forgot about it by the end of the week when they see you. Sorry to say.
Vanessa, one of the other things you mentioned was that there's 24/7 nursing coverage. So not all of the nurses get a chance to work with other nurses in bleeding disorders. What's it like from a nursing perspective to helping kids, obviously kids that you might know, but kids that you don't know, and with nurses that you haven't worked with before?
I think in Ontario we're pretty lucky because as a national group, the nurses meet on a yearly basis, and we see each other a lot at different conferences or meetings. But as an Ontario group, we meet at least twice a year, and we know each other quite well. So it's a different experience than in most other areas of specialty. I would say that majority of the nurses are quite close and are quite good friends, just from the amount of programs and activities that we do together through Hemophilia Ontario or even through work. So for us, it's also nice to be able to see each other, and we know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and we know who's at what clinic and whose kids are whose. So it helps out with dealing with different problems that may arise while we're at camp. Mm-hmm. So it is a great experience for us too, and also seeing kids in a different environment. So they're very different when they're at camp versus when they're in a clinic setting. And you see a lot of personalities come out, which is really nice. I think there's a question. It says, Wanakita operates using rule of 3. If so, is it blind, or does anyone know if they're assigned to? What does that mean?
So the rule of 3 is the rule that we have at Pinecrest, which is the other Hemophilia Ontario website. Camp program. Oh, good. I'm sorry about that. That's my home phone. But basically, it ensures that campers are never one-on-one with staff, right? You would only ever go somewhere in a group. And Wanakita has very clear child safety policies, and I can't say that I've read the entire manual, but I feel confident that their policies would be the similar or stronger.
So you mean that there's always two people with someone?
Yeah, you would never have a situation where a camper and a counselor were alone.
I don't know. I don't know what their policies are on that. I know that there's always the buddy rule where they're always with someone. I don't know what the counselor to child ratio is at all times though.
Jenna, how many pre-registrations have been received so far?
More than 50.
So does it make any difference if you do it tonight versus?
No, it makes zero difference. It doesn't matter if somebody registered on Monday when it opens or if they wait and they do it like at midnight on the 16th.
Okay.
All of those round registrations will be considered together as one group with the first round of camper selection criteria.
Okay, that's great.
So at what age do kids go as SC? So they can go as young as 15, and then they can go all the way. So if they start at 15, they'll do their first year as 15, second year as 16, and then they'd be done. Or they could start at their first year as 16 and second year as 17. Typically it's 15 when they start, and they go for a full month at that time. And then the program is 2 years long, with the hopes that they would then be hired by Wanakita as an assistant counselor and then a counselor afterwards. Majority of the campers that go for the SC program do become counselors afterwards, and it's great to have them there and present for our kids to see that we actually have a presence within the actual counseling group, and that Hemophilia Ontario has fostered these kids to become role models for others.
Yeah, and I'll just speak to that. Having just last month we had Just the Guys, and we encourage youth leadership to be part of Just the Guys and other events. But just as an example, we had out of the 5 youth leaders that joined us, 4 of those leaders were from Camp Wanakita and Camp Wanakita Experience. And the other youth leader had actually gained leadership skills with the other camp in Ontario called Pinecrest Adventure Camp. So it really is an opportunity for them to foster, and Hemophilia Ontario encourages the youth to then take advantage of the leadership skills that they've gained through the student counselor program, or becoming a counselor with Camp Wanakita. Does anyone else have any other questions for Justin or Vanessa or Jenna regarding camp or regarding the process that got started at the beginning of the week?
I know a lot of first-time parents that are sending kids to camp, they want to know when their nurse is going to camp, or if they are going to camp. A lot of the nurses now know what week they're going. So if you want to ask your nurse what week they're going, feel free to do so. And then you'll be able to choose your week on pre-registration for the week that they're going, if that's what you would like to do.
I've got a question from Travis and Lindsay. They asked, is there any issues with bullying among campers? And from my experience, there's almost none. From what I remember, I've never been bullied, and I've never seen anybody been bullied. It's really a place to have a good time.
And camp does have a no bullying policy. So basically, if someone is bullying, that it's very stringent that they will not be kept at camp. The parents have to come pick them up. So Bashir asked, if someone cancels after April 30th, can't you send someone else from the waiting list? So we've had that happen this year, and not necessarily do we always have someone that applies to the position. So let's just say it was a senior girls position, and if we have no one on the wait list to fill it, then we end up losing the money to Wanakita. Sometimes there is the best case scenario where Wanakita may have someone on their wait list and they fill it, but doesn't mean that we'll get the actual cancellation feedback from Wanakita. And what are pickup and drop-off times? I can't remember specifically, but I do know that the pickup time is earlier than the drop-off. So the drop-off, depending on if you take the bus or if you are dropped off directly at camp. So there's different bus stops. There's a bus stop in Hamilton, Burlington, and Toronto that Wanakita has specific coach buses that pick up from. The bus fee is not covered by Hemophilia Ontario, but they have pickup times that are on their website. And I believe it's in the morning, and they arrive at Wanakita around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, depending on what week they're going to on the Sunday. For pickup time's usually at 10 in the morning, and the buses leave around that time as well from camp. And then how close is the hospital? So the closest hospital is Halliburton, which is basically off the main camp road. So it's about, I would say, if you have to get there quickly, you can get there in 12 minutes. The hospital that has more facilities is in Minden, and that's about 25 minutes. But I would say if we need it in a hospital, majority of it we deal with on site. We'll treat right away on site and manage the camper on site before we would actually go to the hospital. We haven't had a scenario we had to call EMS, but we know that it takes EMS about 15 minutes to get into Wanakita. How do you register for the buses? So on Hemophilia, on Wanakita's website, there is actually they talk about the bus pickup and drop off, and because you get a special code from Hemophilia Ontario, the code won't cover the bus when you actually do the registration. We have the link to do it on Wanakita's website. So when you do that, that will actually ask for your credit card at the end to pay for the bus if you have clicked off the bus that you're not dropping off your kid. And I would say majority of kids actually come by bus.
Those have been some great questions. Thank you, everyone. Is there any other questions that we can answer?
Yes, stand by it.
Yeah. Okay.
Should we just unmute them so they can ask them instead of type them?
Sure.
Is it advisable to pay for laundry services over the 2 weeks? Absolutely. Especially depending on the weather. So it depends on the weather that you're getting at camp. So if it's a really wet one, the kids really need the laundry services over 2 weeks. I highly suggest for the little ones that if parents put in an outfit in a big Ziploc bag, one per day, it really works well, and put numbers on them, so then the kids know every day to change their clothes and put their dirty clothes in the last Ziploc bag. Otherwise, they'll end up wearing the same outfit for the whole 2 weeks, and they'll come back with all their clean clothes for you except the one that they're wearing.
Tried to unmute everybody, but it says that they've muted their own and they can't be unmuted by anyone else. So if anyone wants to ask a question over the telephone or through your computer microphone, you'll just need to unmute yourself.
And the other one is, do they get assistance or do they have someone come dedicated? No, so the laundry goes to an actual laundry service. So it'll go out in a bag with their name on it and come back for them. So they're not doing any laundry. Yeah, I wish I could send mine out. And a really important thing too is when you send your kid with all their clothes, write their name in all their clothes, because especially in the junior boys cabin, they get a lot of confusion as to what's theirs and what's their cabin mates. So just if you write their names in, their counselors are able to figure out whose is what. Are they housed mainly with others with bleeding disorders or spread out? So it depends on the age group. Typically the junior boys, they end up being with quite a few campers that have bleeding disorders, but YMCA Wanakita tries to integrate. So they try to have only a couple per cabin. And the reason for this is to make it an integrated camp, so it's not just a hemophilia camp or just an ordinary camp with no bleeding disorders. And that's why they've actually capped us off at 65 positions, because of the fact that if they give us any more, it ends up taking over some of the cabins, and then they don't have any integration at all. So typically it's mixed.
So I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening for the webinar. If you have any other questions, by all means, you can contact me anytime by email or by phone, and we'd be happy to address them with you. As we've mentioned many times, pre-registration is open now until October 16th. Please feel free to fill it out anytime before October 16th to be considered in the first round. After October 16th, you would be going on the waiting list, and we will try to get in touch with everybody who's applied on October 23rd, although we do have a lot of applications, so please maybe give us a day or two of flexibility, but definitely within that week, we will be in touch to let you know the status of your application and to provide you with the code for you to register directly with Wanakita if you are selected. I think Matthew is also going to find a way to get this presentation up on YouTube. So if you know of other parents who are thinking about sending their kids to Wanakita this summer, weren't able to join us this evening, we will have a link available for people to go back and to listen to everything we've discussed this evening again.
Absolutely. So thank you.
Last call for questions.
Yeah, last call for questions, and absolutely want to thank you, Jenna and Vanessa and Justin for being with us this evening, and look forward to everyone having an excellent camp experience, not just in this pre-registration, but once they get to camp in 2018. Thanks for being with us, everyone, and have a good evening and a great Thanksgiving.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Justin.
No problem.
Wait, say thanks, Vanessa.
Thanks, Vanessa.
And everybody else.
And everybody else.
Thank you for coming. Hope to see you at camp.
You will.
I will.
Good night.
Good night.
Great.
Good night.